A lot of people will say being in touch with this information will give people ideas, but that wasn't the case for me. Not having SOGI education didn't prevent me from being queer or being transgender, just made me confused and afraid and ashamed.
I think SOGI inclusive education is really important because it benefits all students. So if you create an inclusive school, we know from our research and from other people's research that heterosexual students benefit just as much as students who identify with different sexual orientations and gender identity. So if you create an inclusive environment for one group, you end up creating an inclusive school for everybody.
Gender will always be part of life. Most people feel primarily as a boy or man or a girl or woman, but what we're trying to do is just to create a little bit more space because there are people in the world who their biology or their gender identity doesn't necessarily fit neatly into these two rigid boxes.
So if you are a trans or a queer student, what kinds of things are you asked to change about yourself in like high school life? Sometimes the school system in particular needs to add things in order to become more inclusive.
Support for diversity in schools is legally required by the BC Human Rights Code. This code helps protect all of us from discrimination and harassment.
Going into my practicum, I was quite nervous about how I was going to implement SOGI practices. So with the grade 11s, we did a slam poetry unit. I had a prompt for students that said something along the lines of, if only he knew that. I ended up having one of my students who identifies as male write a poem from the perspective of a male in love with another male student. And I think poetry naturally lends itself to this idea of exploring identity, being vulnerable.
I think for some students, they come from a different cultural background or religious background. Their cultural background is part of that diversity, their religious beliefs are part of that diversity, but so are different sexual orientations and gender identities, and it's about developing respect and understanding of the ways in which we're different and how we can come together.
好多時喺華人社區入邊，好多人會話因為家庭觀念、華人嘅傳統美德，所以我哋唔可以接受唔同嘅性取向或者性別表達。但係傳統嘅華人美德最重要嘅一部分就係愛護仔女，而愛護仔女希望佢哋健康快樂成長最好嘅辦法就係接受你仔女。
SOGI 123 is one of the tools teachers can use to better understand the diversity in our schools, to better understand sexual orientation and gender identity, so that they can include themes and weave it into the teaching that they have. BCCPAC is working with the Ministry of Education to create parent resources to explain what SOGI inclusive education is in BC schools.
One big thing that I've tried to take on this year is to teach a queer novel to my grade 9 class and to not preface it as such. When I was doing it with my students this year, I was just so surprised to see how unfazed they were by it, how this was just, to them, something normal, something that was part of their life quite naturally.
We're diverse, and so our ideas that you can turn things into black and white are actually not the way it is in this world. And it's something we need to get past so that we're beginning to think of everybody as being unique and different and wonderful and beautiful.
My goal is that everyone listening to the sound of my voice will hear their experience and their identity reflected in the words that I choose, in the examples that I use. They will hear that they are known, that they're seen, that they're important.
I've never heard like a teacher say this before. She was taking attendance and then she said, if you have a preferred name, then we can change it on the attendance, no problem. So I think for us it's really important and it's like a big deal because I know I wouldn't want to be called by my birth name. I'd want to be called Kian, and I'm so glad that they acknowledge that.
Chances are there are queer students or students who one day might identify as part of the LGBTQ community. And I think that's the simple reality. And that's the main reason why I believe it's so important to have a GSA in the secondary school setting. Not just creating a space where they're tolerated or where they're sort of safe, but creating a space where they're lit up and they see the possibilities for their life.
Some people who may not be out or are too scared, they might feel excluded, but then like say if that student sees, oh, our school celebrates diversity, they're gonna think, oh, it's okay to be myself.
It's really important that families are accepting of young people's sexual orientation and gender identity, because we know that an inclusive school makes a difference, but also an inclusive family. We see better outcomes both academically, mental health-wise, reduced risk of substance use, all across the board. We see much better outcomes if parents are accepting.
My advice to parents would be to listen. Do ask questions, talk to your kids, talk to the teacher. They're the ones going to be integrating it, so talk to them about it.
It's really important to ask questions, be curious. The one person who would probably help you the most is your child. Don't shut them out. Keep the lines of communication open. Talk to them, ask them. Sometimes they'll be fed up. They don't want to answer your questions because they're teenagers. But I would say be curious and listen, be compassionate.